Hmm. Hi, so welcome to the conversations on decoloniality and fashion. And this is our second to last one of 2022. So we're very excited. Together with Angela Janssen and I, Erica de Groef, we are tonight's conveners. And as we know, the aim of this series has been to experiment with alternative knowledge creation and exchange through communal conversation and through interdisciplinary engagements. We're very excited and we invite you to join us in listening and in conversation. So for this conversation on critical theory on patriarchy, we're kind of led by the work of Claudia van Weerhof, and the translation of her work, Mother Earth or Death, Reflections on a Critical Theory of Patriarchy. And so drawing on that important sort of kind of lineage of work, our thinking tonight and our kind of conversation that we're going to expand on. So we're very excited to welcome Sikhanyisiwe or Ska Sebata, whose film, Her Disintegrated Notion, looks to bring to light the truth of many Zimbabwean women, but also just how perception plays such a big role in how women are viewed and the ideas of women, what a woman is and what she faces in Zimbabwe, which is completely different from what is real and on the ground. So this notion is blurred and disintegrated as statistics show, and that women are disadvantaged in health, work, home, and their surroundings. So this film is quite evocative, and we're very, very excited to have Ska join us. Claudia, we did invite Claudia in, but under the circumstances, Claudia won't be able to join us. So Claudia's work that sort of supports this is, so Claudia herself is a German sociologist and political scientist, and she held the first professorship for women's studies in Austria, so based at the Institute for Political Science at the University of Innsbruck. And her books in English include a number of books around women, The Last Colony, There Is an Alternative, and Failure of Modern Civilization, the struggle for a deep alternative. So Ska is a multi-talented creative who is part of a who's part of a kind of growing community of creative and social entrepreneurs and passionate about social justice and sustainability. It's really important, and she's a contemporary human rights advocate working across cross-cutting human rights issues through telling the stories of underrepresented and rural populations through multiple artistic dimensions and disciplines. She's an Accountability Lab, Zimbabwe Film Fellowship alumni, Mandela Washington Fellowship alumni, an Academy for Women entrepreneur, as well as an Arts in Medicine Fellow for 2022. So we really welcome you, Ska, and I think you've also got some news around your film that you'll be able to share with us. And so absolutely. And I'm just wondering, maybe Angela, if you want to start kind of just introducing the kind of question. I think Scott would like to just share with you as well, just your bandwidth is quite challenged. You are joining us from Zimbabwe. So sometimes if your camera is off, it's to try and save your bandwidth or make your bandwidth better. So yeah, but absolutely. Angela, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Erica. I was just wondering if we first want to see the film, or do you want to go straight into the first question?
I think the film kind of sets a scene for us to think through. So I would say the film.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it would be great just for us together in the room to share the film.
Okay, so sorry, I'm just going to put it up again because it disappeared. Oh, I think I'm going to need some help here. Why does it keep going to the next slide if it's playing a film? Anybody know?
I'm not too sure. Oh dear, is your slide on a timer?
Yeah, but usually when it plays a film, it stays on the slide. How can I stop the, sorry.
It's okay. Do you have the film on your desktop as well? Or in the folder?
Here. And then, okay, stop share. Sorry.
Okay. I would share, but my bandwidth is also variable. There we go.
Yeah, but wait, it's not the beginning.
Disintegrated. Beautiful, vibrant, alluring, spiritual, delicate, curving, strong, captivating, intelligent, dedicated, and fascinating. That's her. That's it. Gender inequality, poverty, family pressure, gender-based violence, early marriage, and inadequate health options, amongst many other factors, are stopping her from achieving her full potential. About 1 in 3 of her, aged 15 to 49, have experienced physical violence, and about 1 in 4 of her have experienced sexual violence from the age of 15, with 78% of her reporting that their husband or intimate partner was the perpetrator. 32% of her are married before the age of 18, with 62% of her in the school-going age, missing school during their period because they lack the necessary sanitary wear. Her maternal mortality rate is one of the highest worldwide, and HIV/AIDS is particularly prevalent amongst her. Her income is generally lower than that of men, accompanied by less job security. She makes up 60% of the population, yet she is underrepresented in decision-making positions, discriminated against on the basis of her biology. Affected most by climate change, weather disasters, and pandemics. The notion of what a woman is here is blurred between what society expects of and portrays her to be and what is real. Her current decisions are based on choosing between her well-being, both physical and emotional, and that of her families. Most times, she cannot have both. Establishing an equal footing in terms of education, health, governance, as well as within financial domains, should be prioritized to allow her advancement in the country. That starts with government being accountable to the women and youth who make up the majority of the population. Pro-female products which facilitate her success and eventually her participation in the country's development are a must. Sadly, initiatives and policies which promote her to decision-making positions very rarely transform the systems and fundamental prejudices that create a gap between her formal and actual power. Isolated strategies aimed at empowering her do not necessarily change the perceptions held by those in power of her and her capabilities. Changes in perceptions of her are only partly achieved by investing in her education and ability to generate an income. Efforts aimed at economic empowerment and on promoting her to strategic positions overlook the important role of her organizing to challenge and undo beliefs and systems that prevent her from achieving equality in all spheres of her life. Patriarchal attitudes at community level continue to be the most significant hurdle for her in the system. Historically, she has been denied authority over her own education, health, and reproductive rights, and has had limited control over material assets. Research highlights how the colonial legacy of gender inequality on traditional African systems and beliefs continues to perpetuate male dominance and power at the expense of her rights and access to resources. She has borne the brunt of globalization and privatization, where unemployment and inequality tend to affect her most adversely. Her entrepreneurship and empowerment continue to be key focus areas of development initiatives and action in Africa. Entrepreneurship is increasingly hailed as one of the cornerstones of women's empowerment and overall economic growth on the continent, addressing structural barriers to her empowerment.
Wow. That is so powerful. Thank you so much, Scaf, for sharing this film with us, for making this film. So I think before we address the
year
film,
is 1981. My first public exam is scheduled for Saturday, March the 8th. It's March the 7th, Friday evening, 6 o'clock. Guess where I am? Sitting in Venus Theatre in Perambur,
is that
waiting
me?
for the 6 o'clock show. I watch as my favorite hero, Rajnikant, strides onto screen and wins.
Angela, I think you need to stop the YouTube. It continued to play.
My apologies. Technology is really not on my side. this evening. I'm so sorry. Because first I thought it was Sky responding. And I was like, but then sorry. So yeah, before we talk about the movie or the film, I do wanted to kind of like acknowledge what inspired the theme of this evening, which is Claudia von Werlhof's work. And I think what really, really struck me is a very basic principle where she explains that in order to be able to change patriarchy, we need to understand it. And it sounds so simple, but of course it's a term that we regularly use, but what does it really, really mean? And I was really struck actually how little has been really on a theoretical level, if you like, written about patriarchy. And so I've been incredibly fascinated by her work. Unfortunately, very little is available in English. Most of it is either in German or Spanish. But so yeah, her book, I literally started translating it through Google Translate. And so yeah, first of all, she explains how patriarchal culture is defined as characterized by actions and emotions that value competition, war, hierarchies, power, growth, procreation, the domination of others, and the appropriation of resources, combined with a rational justification of it all in the name of truth. So in this culture, which engulfs most modern humans, we live in mistrust and seek certitude through control, including control of the natural world. And I think that is so incredibly key, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So conversely, historical matristic cultures were characterized by conversations highlighting inclusion, participation, collaboration, understanding, respect, sacredness, and the always recurrent cyclic renovation of life. Important to note is that matriarchy is not the opposition of patriarchy, that is the domination of women. Instead, it is the absence of domination. It is egalitarian. So in a patriarchal culture, both women and men are patriarchal. And in a matristic culture, she explains, both men and women are matristic. So matristic and patriarchal cultures are different manners of living, different forms of relating, and manners of emotioning, different closed networks of conversation that are realized in each case by both men and women. And I just thought that was really, I don't know, eye-opening, but then again, maybe it also shows how little I have, read and studied and researched patriarchy. But so what she brings forward within the book is overcoming patriarchy requires an internal cultural healing, the revitalization of traditions and the creation of new ones. The realization that a civilization based on the love of life is a far better option than one based on its destruction. So I've been, so puzzled how, if we look at the state of the world that we're living in today, how human beings are willing to go as far as to destroy their own kind by destroying their own livelihood. So why do we, both men and women in patriarchal cultures, choose destruction over life? Is it because worse than destroying ourselves is living in incertitude? Like when she points out, it's a seek of certitude through control, patriarchy. Is it that we have come addicted to certitude through control? Or is it because incertitude requires trust, and trust requires relationships, relationality? So I was thinking, and maybe we can reflect on it together, or maybe Ska, you want to kind of like reflect on it first, is how do you make sense of this choice for destruction over the choice of life?
Hello. Hi, Angela. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
All right. So I read through the abstract, hey, and then I found that it's an unfortunate instance of the patriarchal, because they believe that they have a right to life more than others. Like they believe that their life is much more sacred than others, and so they deserve to be perpetuated to such an extent whereby when their own life or livelihood is threatened, then they create circumstances that are not pro-life for those in opposition. Like I'll give you an example of a case in Zimbabwe where there was a bill which was supposed to oppose the age of sexual consent. It used to be at 16 years old. So it had already been irregular in that the age of consent for sex was 16 years old for females. But then the age of legal marriage was 18. And you found that there were men in powerful positions, even the Attorney General was fighting for it to be reduced to 12, so that young girls could consent to sex at 12 years old. And then it was later established that he actually had relations with a young female who was 12 years old. And then you find they wanted the law to change so that they'll be able to protect the men who had already broken the law before. So it was easier to do that over the lives of the many young girls who have been affected by this decision, rather than them just following the law or raising it higher. They chose to make it more difficult for the greater majority to serve the fewer who are actually in a position of power. So yeah, that's what I think. That's what I found and related to our situation in Zimbabwe.
But what really strikes me in her writing is that in a patriarchal system or culture, it's not just the men, right? I mean, I have, for example, lived in Morocco, where I see that the system is also held in place by women in the sense through education, through raising their sons.
That's true. And not even just through raising their sons, but there's so many women, and I feel like in Zimbabwe, it's such a huge thing, who are a privilege of patriarchy. They benefit a lot through resources, through just the mere power, through the things that they have access to. And so they perpetuate, they're the gatekeepers of patriarchy. So it's not just through their sons, it's literally through the way they live their lives every day, and how they block opportunities, or how they actually encourage young women to be in these positions because it benefits them more than it benefits the young women.
Yeah, I wonder if it's probably a bit of both, where there's also a certain extent unconsciousness, no, how the system works. Because I think if women could have direct access or direct, let's say, self-determination about all these topics that you also mentioned in your film, is then they wouldn't have to have the access to men to have access to resources or power. I mean, what strikes me in her writing is that matriarchy is not the opposite of patriarchy, in a sense of it's not a domination by women, it's a lack of domination. So in a matriarchic system, the way Claudia describes it, there is no need for domination, because in its core, it's egalitarian. You know what I mean? So I kind of like feel that women who protect these gatekeepers, as you're saying, is also up to a level because they're part of that patriarchic system.
Yeah.
And then maybe not aware of
any other system,
of an alternative system,
yeah,
so-called matriarchy, where there is an absence of domination.
I also think that it's context-based. Like I actually live in a village. Like I live in the village where my film was shot. And you found that during COVID, during the height of COVID, during lockdown, the women took over. They took over the sourcing of resources. They took over the planning of everything. And so there was no dominance. It was just the women doing their own thing in regards to how they're safeguarding the family's lives, how they're planning everything. But then when lockdown ended, everything shifted back. So I think it's context-based, and it depends on just the situation around. They may not realize what it is that they're doing, but it is possible in some situations because of the context.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that in kind of like periods of crisis then, or was it because the men were unavailable or they had to leave, or because how, like?
In Zimbabwe mostly, and especially in the town, I'm from Victoria Falls and it's a resort town. The majority of people who do have jobs are the men within the communities. They're the ones who work in the hotels, they work within the resort city of Victoria Falls, they have the jobs. And so with lockdown happening, everything was shut down. And so the men had to stop going to work. So they had no source of income. And so the women took over. They were now either buying and selling or doing handicrafts, and you know that's the system that was now in place. And so it's because the men had no power. Literally, they couldn't go to work, they couldn't provide, they couldn't earn a living, and so the women took over.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. It kind of reminds me also in periods of war, right? When men go off to war, and then, as you say, there's a women's kind of like a system run by women that then takes over.
I would say that, you know, I think the impact of COVID on so many communities did allow for a very different kind of social system to temporarily be at play. In South Africa, we had incredible cross-community support that just suddenly quite sort of organically was looking out for others. And again, also quite women-driven around nurture, around care, that that the lockdown kind of shifted the mold. And maybe that was one of my kind of questions, maybe, Sky, if we could maybe, you know, come to your film and you know, congratulations. I think you'll share with us, you know, the exciting news about the film, and that it's really sort of gained quite a bit of interest and sort of local and global recognition. And one of the things that you sort of that was in the text that supported us seeing the film was where you kind of talk about when we begin to teach about patriarchy beyond workshops and conferences and bring it to schoolhouses and universities and homes and churches and playgrounds. So like really kind of, and so as you say, you know, bringing it to like the film was shot where you live. So really bringing it in dialogue in a very immediate way. Only then can we start to break the mold that is patriarchy. So I think something like COVID kind of just busted patriarchy for a little while. I think Scar's just left, dropped up. But I think this idea of breaking this mold in Zimbabwe, but you know, I think on so many levels what is happening globally. And as Angela, you kind of pointing out, climate crisis is kind of sort of breaking a certain kind of mold of like control of man over nature. There's a crack. What we spoke about in the last session around sort of the decolonial cracks, the kind of sort of cracks in that structure or that demand for control. So I think, I'm hoping Sky will be able to join us shortly. I'm just wondering, I know, hello Francesca and Daniela, I know you've been part of the conversation, but Emily is also joining us from Zimbabwe. And maybe Emily, I'm not sure if you want to sort of speak about the film, like how does that feel about watching the film? I don't know if you want to share your thoughts on the film. I'm not sure if Emily is.
Hi.
Great.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
So I had internet jigs, so I didn't see the film from the start. I only saw maybe about 30 seconds of the last part of the film, so I can't comment on that. I'm sorry.
Okay, but just to maybe share that your work is also really looking at the impact of patriarchy on the way that women fashion themselves.
Okay. So my research it's focusing on how patriarchy shapes women choose to fashion themselves. So so far I have some findings which qualify that patriarchy really has an impact on women's dress, and it's the women themselves are the custodians of the patriarchal values, and it runs within the family and extends to the extended family and to the whole society and the nation at large. So the women actually embrace their femininity using the patriarchal values, the concept of modesty, the concept of decency and the appropriate versus inappropriate dress that are all prescribed by the patriarchal society.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's to such a degree that it's kind of normalized. And maybe Angela, that's what you're kind of pointing with Claudia, is sort of saying in her writing, she says it's a set of norms that prioritizes a particular view on the world, a particular domination that is so sort of sweeping, so it impacts the entire community.
Yes, and the politics of dress that is within the patriarchal structure, it constructs the woman through gendered dress. So the construction of women through gendered dress represents femininity represents their femininity within the Shona context. It considers some type of dress as material objects that are infused with feminine ideals of being.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe
Yeah.
that relates back to what Ska was talking about, maybe how women in a patriarchal system find ways to resources.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, like, if we bring it back to that patriarchy is not necessarily about or women or male or female or masculinity or femininity, but really go to the core of the principle, which is domination. If you look at the fashion system, the way it's run now, it's based on hierarchy and exclusivity, right? It's about where you kind of like situate yourself or trying to situate yourself on this scale, on this hierarchy of social whatever standing class. Or so I kind of wonder what a fashion system then would look like in a metristic culture, right? If you take away domination, if you take away hierarchy, if you even kind of like take away control, because you could see fashion as a system of control, and talking about the contemporary, the dominant fashion system, it's a means of control, right? It's a means of kind of like ordering the world according to race, gender, social status, right? So how would we even start thinking about a fashion system if you take away all those structures? How would fashion then look like?
And then maybe to go to that point that it's the absence of domination, different manners of living, different forms of relating and manners of emotioning. So fashion as a kind of sense of relating, fashion as a sense of living. So just the way in which this kind of sociality of fashion, that would completely radically change. And maybe if we look at communities that try and identify a metristic community. We struggle to try and find a metristic community, but if we kind of try and imagine a metristic community, which is about caring for nature and caring for community, would our sense of fashioning be different?
Well, it kind of reminds me, and it's not necessarily metristic cultures, but how Pacific communities used to kind of like build up their fashion through exchange, where, for example, certain shells, certain feathers were exchanged between communities. And so you kind of like if you like, your status or your fashionability, I suppose, was based on your ability to exchange, because the more, you could get components into your wardrobe, if you like, through exchange, the more esteem you had. So I'm kind of like wondering that's kind of like a system where you build your fashionability through relationality.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that could even be a start.
Yeah. Those other terms that you also kind of drew on, participation, collaboration. I mean, those are the words that Claudia was talking about: participation, collaboration, respect, sacredness, sort of the kind of cyclical nature of being with others. So if we had to kind of think of different fashion systems where there's an exchange of clothing amongst people, so you don't own clothing, so owning as a hierarchy, so a kind of exchange culture around clothing, that could imagine a different kind of system. Collaboration, collaboration in terms of fashion is also quite an interesting one. So it's additive, not Yeah. So yeah, ownership, I think.
That component of destruction, right? I mean, the current dominant fashion system is very oriented on destruction, right? Exclusion and destruction. So this idea of what a system would look like that values life over destruction.
I would like to maybe sort of invite a broader conversation. So I think I did try and get Ska on email, but I haven't got a direct WhatsApp number to reach her. Hopefully she might still join us, but I think if we understand that, you know, that in terms of our recording, I think we could come to the, bless you, come to the